So the next step is to throw the pen inside my desk scene. So I'll just give this a quick save. Now I've been working on this. I saved it as pen 01. I'm going to select the pen, Command C to copy, and I'll close the window that I'm working on. Now Cinema 4D is prompting me to save changes, and I was pretty certain that I saved it, but better safe than sorry, so I'll say yes. Now, before I started creating my pen, remember, I started out with a cylinder object inside my desk scene, and that was just a reference to start to get the scale relative to the desk. So I'll delete that, and I'll paste the new thing that I'm working on. I'm going to let the pen float in space just for a minute. And the next thing I'm going to do is create a sheet of paper for this thing, for the pen to lay on. So I'm going to generate a cube. And the benefit of having a cube rather than something like a plane, if I look in here, we have a plane object, is that the cube itself has the potential to have a y-axis. We can always flatten this out. So we can flatten that down to the point where it's really, really flat. But it has the potential, so if we want to create a stack of papers, we can always just increase the y size of this shape. Now, I'm going to play around with just a few values, just try to get the scale of this. I'll just kind of eyeball this really quickly. I'll change my view just a bit, but that's more or less the size that I want to create here. Now, I could be really precise about this and say, okay, well, I want the x value to be 8.5 by 11, because I know that's the proportion of paper, and obviously I've made that very small, so I'll change this to 85 by 1100, and it's still very small, but at this point, if I wanted to preserve that proportion of the sheet of paper, so 8.5 by 11, I could now just kind of scale this up, or I could make this, I'll multiply it by 2 to make it twice as big, and I'll do the same thing here. I could multiply by 2, and so very quickly I could, create some math. Now, still feels a little small, and so I'll just kind of scale this whole thing up. I'll grab the scale tool, and if I scale outside here, that'll start to scale it up. Okay, that feels pretty good relative to the rest of my pen, although it seems a little high along the y-axis, so I'll take that down so it's much flatter. Now again, I just want to make a real quick pass here. I'll drop this onto the surface of the table. The next thing that I want to do is I want to load a texture for the paper. And if you look inside your project folder, I'll go into my class folder, inside the desk scene folder, inside the text folder, and the text is just short for texture, I have a paper.psd document. Now, the paper, as a Photoshop document, can be loaded directly into the color channel of a texture. So I'll double click in the material manager. I'll double click on that texture to edit it, and I'll call it paper. As long as I have the color channel selected, I can go into the texture field and go way over here to this ellipse, and I'll click on the ellipse, and that allows me to go and look for a file to load as the texture. So I'll just jump into my desk scene, inside texture, and I'll load paper. I'll say okay. It's kind of hard to see in the preview, but I'm pretty satisfied that that texture has been loaded. And I'll click, drag and drop, and there we go. And I'm getting a preview of the texture, but if I give that a real quick render, you can see that that renders as a piece of paper. I have that height dimension, and I'm pretty satisfied. But now looking at this, I feel like the pen is huge compared to the paper. Okay, and I can get a better sense of that if I'll just name this accordingly, and I'll take that pen. I'll go to the rotate tool, and I'll just rotate this. So if I hold down the shift key, it'll constrain that rotation to 10-degree increments, and I'll just drop that pen down onto the paper. I could rotate that, but looking at this, if I take the pen that I happen to have in my hand and I lay that across the sheet of paper, it's about 2/3 the length, maybe a little bit less than that sheet of paper, and this is much larger. So just by having a couple of items handy for scale, I'll jump in and I'll go back to the scale tool, and as long as I don't interact with any of these handles and just click and drag on the outside, that'll scale that whole stack of paper proportionally. So I'll just scale that up until it feels about right, and that looks pretty good. I'll go back to the move tool, and so that kind of gives me the information that I need. Now my pen's not in the right right space. I really want to kind of emphasize, I want to rotate this. It feels a little too precise. But for now, I have basic paper texture, basic pen, and now I can start to populate the rest of my desk scene. Now, when I render this, it doesn't look like much, but the texture's helping out. At this point, I'll throw some really basic lights into the equation. And again, I'll keep it really simple. I'll create a light. This will be a temporary key light. I'm going to be a little bit more sophisticated about my lighting this time around. But at least this will illuminate the scene. I'll kind of move it over and to the foreground just a bit. And I'll turn my shadows, shadow map soft on. And just with a real quick light source into the scene, now you can see that I'm starting to cast some shadows. And that really helps to make this space a little bit more convincing. So in the next presentation, we'll continue to push forward and we'll start to look at a lamp object. And this will probably be the most complex thing that we model inside this project, because we'll really take a look at the hierarchy, and we'll kind of rig this lamp so that if we grab the top of the lamp and move it, the rest of the lamp will follow with it. Or more accurately, we'll grab the bottom of the lamp and kind of rotate the arms into place. And everything will be rigged so that the lamp functions in an appropriate way. But we'll do that in the next presentation.